Okay, so we will start our first session, our first keynote session, and I would like to introduce Dr. Katie Monning, who is also one of my great friends. She joined the Pop Culture Classroom team in 2018 and is the Director of Education. In 2008, Dr. Monning earned her PhD with a concentration on education with graphic novels and other pop culture literacies from Kent State University. After that, Dr. Monnin spent 10 years as an associate professor of literacy in Florida and wrote 8 books, dozens of articles, lesson plans, teaching guides, reviews, and more, focused on teaching popular culture in the classroom. In her free time, Dr. Monnin enjoys hanging out with Jason and his family through Skype. I would like to invite Katie Monning up to the podium. Thank you.
Hi, how are you today? Thank you for having me. Good morning. Before I speak today, I want to thank the TEEM 2018 Conference Leadership Team, Konkuk University. I also want to thank my friends and colleagues, Dr. Jawan Lee, Dr. Jason Lee, and my dear friend that made it today, Dr. Chonga Lee, and everyone who met with me last December to begin the conversations for this weekend's conference. Thank you, all of you, for this wonderful conference, the opportunity to speak at this conference, and most importantly, for all of the learning about multimedia and pop culture education that will occur over the weekend. I also want to thank my partner for traveling with me to my favorite country and spending time with me in a country so dear to my heart. I am truly honored to be here today. Today, I would like to start with a quotation that I saw before my first trip to Korea in May of 2017. One's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things. Henry Miller. I have visited Korea 3 times in the last year and a half. From my first visit in May of 2017 through my second visit in December of 2017 to today, Korea has never been a destination, but a place of enlightenment and clarity for me. Korea, and especially my Korean friends and colleagues, have offered me a new way of seeing my career, both personally and professionally. I have been so moved by Korea and my experiences here that it's sometimes emotional for me to speak about the gifts my visits to Korea have offered me. Today's speech is a culminating event for me, and this speech represents a transition in my career, my scholarship, and most significantly, my personal, renewed, and future passions for teaching with multimedia and pop culture literacies in the 21st century. When I first visited Korea in May of 2017, I was a tenured associate professor of literacy who planned on retiring from the university in which she worked. I had published many pieces of scholarship on teaching multimedia literacies in 21st century educational settings. If we were looking at my scholarly statistics, they may look good. 8 books in 9 years, dozens of articles, like Jason said, some book chapters, 8 years of a monthly column for the world's largest comic book and graphic novel distributor, numerous keynote addresses, and so many more career highlights that look good and maybe even great on paper. And after 9 years, going on 10, of studying and writing about pop culture and multimedia literacies, I felt like that was all those writings were. Pretty good statistics. My heart was no longer in those statistics. I felt proud of my scholarly accomplishments, but not personally fulfilled by them anymore. Something had changed. That something was a new appreciation for what pop culture and multimedia literacies truly could be in educational settings. And my travels to Korea had shown me that future path that I am on today. In December of 2017, I returned to Korea because I felt drawn back to the various ways I saw both Korean education and Korean culture embracing multimedia and pop culture literacies. I spent a significant amount of time with my dear friend, Dr. Chonga Lee, who's here today, spoke at her university DGIST, and was invited on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to spend a weekend with her and her family in her hometown. I visited Seoul again and had ventured out into new areas of Korea I had not seen on my first visit. Everywhere I went, I continued to be inspired by the various ways in which Korean culture and education adopted and embraced multimedia and pop culture literacies. The technology in Korea was better than that in the United States. The evidence of placing value on pop culture and multimedia literacies and lifestyles, both the professional and the personal ways in which I had advocated for pop culture to be embraced in the United States is more than evident in Seoul and across the Korean countryside. I started learning about K-pop, the Korean War, Korea's traditions, cultures, history, and so much more. One day, last December, when Dr. Lee and I were with her family, a reporter asked me what I thought about Korea overall. And I said, when I am in Korea, I can feel the contemporary pulse of history. I can feel the contemporary pulse of history. I can see and feel the merger of the past with the present and the hope for the future. I went home and thought and rethought about that statement. I truly did mean it. And I wondered for a while about why I was falling more in love with Korea's ability to embrace multimedia and pop culture literacies than my own country's ability to embrace pop culture and multimedia literacies. And that is the point of my talk today. Korea is the heart and soul of teaching multimedia literacies both in and out of the classroom. So when I was invited last December to return to Korea today to talk about teaching multimedia in the classroom, my answer was a definite and strong yes. I have been looking forward to this day for a long time. I also knew that this speech would be challenging for me because deep down inside, I knew I couldn't speak to you today without telling you about this journey of personal and professional transformation that Korea had inspired within me. A point I had tried to avoid in all of my previous scholarship, the connection between the professional and the personal. My personal life and my professional life really didn't cross paths until I came to Korea. Today, the two are forever intertwined because my visits to Korea called on me to question why I even studied pop culture to begin with, if I wanted to continue to study pop culture, and what that may even look like if I did. With each question and each visit to Korea, the answers became more clear. With my Korean-inspired revelation in mind about what pop culture and multimedia truly could look like if it was embraced in both educational settings and within a country's culture, like it is in Korea, I left the safety of my tenured professorship and took a risk. Today, I stand before you not as a professor, but instead as the director of education at Pop Culture Classroom in Denver, Colorado. I no longer live in Florida, as I did only 4 months ago, and I now work for an organization that owns Denver Comic Con, Reno Pop Culture Con, and a brand new functional on-site classroom devoted 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and year-round to studying and teaching multimedia literacies and pop culture literacies in the classroom. I no longer think about just studying and writing about pop culture and multimedia. I think about its future. In my new role, I must take my previous scholarship and notability for studying multimedia and transition what I once just saw as publications into realities. Our vision at Pop Culture Classroom is to advocate for and legitimize the teaching of pop culture and multimedia literacies in 21st century classrooms locally in Denver, in the state of Colorado, nationally and internationally. Our scope is very big for the goals of multimedia and pop culture in the classroom. And that is my new charge. From Denver, Colorado to here in Seoul and wherever I travel around the world in the future, I must always be thinking about what pop culture is, the most popular and well-known stories of our own time and place in history, and what it can be, the momentum by which we teach a communication revolution in the lived moment that calls on future readers to be equally literate with both alphabetic and visual literacies simultaneously. My days are now spent envisioning the programs, the coursework, the curriculums, the publications, and the conferences that will leave a pedagogical footprint for future literacy scholars like ourselves. And all of this envisioning started in Korea. In fact, I think my work as a professor led me to this new place. And my once fledgling doubt about whether or not I wanted to continue studying pop culture is now a renewed passion, more vibrant than I ever imagined. I feel as though my professor years were a time when I learned exactly what my gift was to give back to the world, my purpose. And today that purpose feels somewhat a little bit heroic. I want to be a person who stands up for something I believe in. And I believe that the future of teaching literature and literacies is grounded in embracing multimedia and pop culture in both our cultures and our classrooms. To be a superhero, one must possess and share extraordinary abilities with others. It is the sharing of one's power that makes one heroic, right? What if Superman or Iron Man or Wonder Woman, and I had no idea they were going to use those images today, so that was great. That worked out for me. But what if Superman or Iron Man or Wonder Woman chose to keep their abilities to themselves? that wouldn't be too super. As teachers, we share our expertise with learners each and every day, and that makes us pretty super in my mind. We are even more heroic when we think about the whys that inform what we choose to teach in our classrooms. With each decision we make about what counts as literacy and literature in the 21st century, we leave behind that pedagogical footprint. Future scholars will study our decisions regarding whether or not to teach multimedia literacies. To teach or not to teach multimedia literacies, that is our question today. Can we even imagine someone questioning teaching Shakespeare in the classroom when he was alive? Well, they did question teaching Shakespeare when he lived. And that's my point. The list could go on and on with the names of writers and creators we hold crucial to teaching literature and literacies today. But during their lived moment in time, these same popular authors and the literacies they relied on to tell their stories were not considered classroom worthy. With future literacy scholars in mind, I would like us to think about what it might mean if we began teaching a more shared literacy stage, a stage that places equal value on both the traditional alphabetic literacies and new multimodal visual pop culture literacies. Today, multimedia and pop culture literacies equally share the stage with alphabetic print text literacies. And our task, should we choose to accept it, name that movie? No? Okay. Mission Pot, thank you. And our task, should we choose to accept it, is to be the contemporary superhero educators we empower our students to identify, understand, and eventually create and communicate with the literacies of their own time and place in history. While we may sometimes feel like embracing 21st century multimedia literacies in the classroom questions a little bit of a traditional pedagogical emphasis on alphabetic literacies alone, our ability to embrace multimedia in the classroom is actually where our secret superhero powers lie. We are one of the first generations of educators to be faced with redefining what counts as literacy in our classrooms. And only a few times in history has a communication revolution of this magnitude occurred. And only a few times in history have educators been called upon to step up and truly ask themselves whether what they are reading and writing at home themselves, the literacies their students are also reading and writing with at home, are the same literacies that belong in the classroom. We are an exceptionally fortunate generation of educators. And as I currently make a professional transition of my own, I have a unique perspective that comes with the chance to step back and ask myself and you today what the future of teaching multimedia and pop culture may look like. In what ways will we continue to embrace and teach multimedia and pop culture literacies in our classrooms and in our cultures? What will that look like? I look forward to hearing your answers this weekend and learning from you. Together, we can start discussing the many ways in which we can continue to globally embrace multimedia literacies in both our cultures and our classroom. For it is in both places that we live and we teach. Some of the most pressing questions about our time in history are about us, teachers. I cannot think of a more important moment in the history of education to really, truly stop and think about what we are bringing into classrooms and why. Globally, we need to stop and ask ourselves whether the literacies we and our students interact with each and every day via smartphones, video games, computers, graphic novels, social media, Jason's awesome video, and so much more belong in the classroom, and I believe that they do. We are the teaching generation who must question the past, plan for the present, and try to predict the future when it comes to teaching 21st century multimedia to contemporary readers and writers around the globe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again for Katie Monning giving a great speech. Next, we have our second keynote speaker. I am not the host for the second keynote speaker. I would like to invite Professor Yi Kyung up here.
Good morning again, and welcome to the second keynote speech of the TEEM 2018 Joint International Conference. It is with great pleasure to introduce to you our second keynote speaker, Professor Andrew Moody. Professor Moody is Associate Professor of English at the University of Macau, where he teaches courses in sociolinguistics and world Englishes. He has written on the role of English in East Asian and Southeast Asian popular culture and has published in World Englishes, English Language and Teaching Journal, and English Today. His most recent research examines the various roles of dialect in popular music, and he has edited a collection of essays investigating the role of English in Asian popular cultures published by the Hong Kong University Press. Currently, he is writing books on the roles and status of English with Springer, Palgrave Macmillan, and Oxford University Press. Since January 2018, he has served as the editor of the journal English Today, published by Cambridge University Press. Today, we are honored to have Professor Andrew Moody with us. The title of his keynote speech is Teaching Authenticity of Media and Popular Culture Texts. Without further ado, please give Professor Moody a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. That's correct. Oh, that's not correct. Go to the beginning. Turn the volume up. Yeah, it says mute. That's not good. Let's try this. Sorry, we're... Why does it say mute? She wants to play a movie clip. Let's try this one. Oh, it's because it's not playing. Here it is.
It held right up to the end of World War II.
So it does work. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. Now I do this. Awesome. Thanks. Thanks. Don't need. No, I'll use my finger to point. Thank you all for the invitation to speak to you today. As I mentioned at the dinner last night, this is my first trip to Korea, which is, like Jason said, weird, kind of weird. I've been in Asia for a long time, but somehow or another have missed this opportunity until this weekend. And I'm really happy to be able to be here with you all this weekend and to be in your lovely country. I'm going to talk a little bit about authenticity and authority in media texts. Usually in linguistics, we talk a lot about authority in languages, but we don't talk very much about authenticity. And I want to think a little bit about what authenticity means in languages. My orientation is as a sociolinguist. My primary form of teaching and research is all in sociolinguistics. So I hope that's an area that you all have some awareness of or some background in, but I think it's something that we're all interested in some way or another, how sociolinguistics works. But to start off, a little bit about language teaching. A lot of us are interested in using authentic media in language teaching, and I think there's good reasons for that. Many teachers feel that there's a need to bring something authentic into their classrooms, authentic texts. Then there's a smaller group of us who think that we should only use authentic texts. But there's very little critical analysis of what it means for a text to be authentic. What does it mean when we say the text is authentic? And is it possible for a text to be inauthentic? If it's authentic, then it seems like reasonable to say that some texts aren't authentic. So these are the concerns that I'm primarily interested in sociolinguistics, but they also have ramifications in language teaching as well. The research framework that I use primarily is one in World Englishes. And I know this is not a group that maybe is very familiar with World Englishes, so I'll give a brief introduction to what World Englishes is. World Englishes is this approach that basically looks at varieties of English that have been produced through 3 diaspora. The first diaspora is what we call the wave of settlement colonialism that created what we call the inner circle. These are the circles, or these are the Englishes in of places like, you like the Flames? Oh, you're going to love the Flames. There's lots of Flames coming up. These are the varieties in places like the UK, the US, New Zealand, Australia. The second wave of colonialism was a wave of exploitation and trade colonialism, and it created the outer circle. These are countries, or these are English varieties in India or Philippines, Singapore. And we think of these as qualitatively different from the inner circle varieties. And then finally, the third circle, or the third diaspora, was one of globalization, where we are today. And those are the Englishes in China, or the Japan, Korea, for example. We usually think of this as an expanding circle. So taking this research framework, we can think about these 3 circles in 2 different ways. What is the status of English, and what is the status of multilingualism in the 3 areas? So in the inner circle, English is an official language, and English is the only language. It's a monolingual, these are monolingual societies for the most part. In the outer circle, English is also official, but they are multilingual. These are multilingual countries for the most part. And in the expanding circle, English is unofficial and it's multilingual. So there's a kind of fingerprint for each one of the 3 circles. They're very different in terms of how English is received in terms of status and multilingualism. There's another way that we can think about this as well, which is the norms. What are the norms for the 3 circles? So the inner circle is usually taken as a norm-providing circle. In other words, when we think of what is standard English, it comes from this particular inner circle. The expanding circle is normally considered to be norm-dependent. That is, they look to the inner circle for the most part as to what are the norms or what are the standards of English. And then the outer circle, interestingly enough, is both norm-providing and norm-dependent. This is well-known work by Braj Khatru over the years that's come up with this. In terms of authenticity, authenticity is an interesting concept in sociolinguistics, and I want to give you several quotes that kind of highlight where authenticity comes from. The first one is by William Labov, who we think of as the primary person in sociolinguistics, the father of the field, more or less, who basically said that our objective is to observe the way people speak when they don't know that they're being observed. Then they will speak in an authentic way. They'll speak in their actual way. This is, of course, a problem because it's impossible to do, which leads them to the observer's paradox. A number of people in recent years have begun to criticize the idea of authenticity, basically saying that whose language is authentic, whose isn't authentic. And this is a quote by Mary Buchholz to that particular degree, basically couching the idea of authenticity in the Romantic movement in Europe in the 19th century. And more recently, there's been a lot of work in sociolinguistics looking at texts from popular culture or looking at texts from the media, saying that these texts are potentially authentic texts to look at. So within sociolinguistics, the claims that certain languages are authentic and certain languages are not is basically an attempt to try and get away from the standard language. The standard language is seen as one which is affecting authentic language. It's no longer authentic because it's been standardized. And within media, this is particularly important because the words we give for media language or for standard languages are often related to the media. Take, for example, the word BBC English. What is BBC English? It's the language of the media. It's named that. The standard language is named that. And in American English, it's broadcast standard that we call the standard language. So when we think about what standard languages do, we have different varieties of English. And potentially they merge towards a media form which is pluricentric, or which is varied, has great deal of variation. What happens is the standard language intervenes, though, and basically produces a single form, which is something that we think of as standard English or as standard media language. This is the form that we end up seeing. But I don't think that's quite right. That's not exactly what happens.